Before we begin, let's walk through our webinar platform together. Each of the buttons at the bottom of your screen relate to sections in the On24 console. The speaker view is where you will see our presenters throughout the webinar. The slide view is where you'll see the accompanying slides. Our poll questions will also appear in the slide area. Be sure to click directly on the slide to answer poll questions throughout the webinar. You can resize these widgets for a larger or smaller view. You may follow along also with a PDF version of the slides that can be found in the related content widget. The CPE criteria section details the requirements you must meet to receive full credit for CPE in this session. To obtain CPE, you must do two things. First, be on the live webinar for at least 50 minutes, and second, respond to 3 of the 4 polling questions that will appear throughout the presentation. You can track your viewing progress in the Earn CPE widget on your screen throughout the webinar. By registering for today's event, you will automatically receive an email after 24 hours with a link to download the slides and a link to view the recording. Additionally, if you meet all the criteria and qualify for CPE, a link to your CPE certificate will be in that email as well. Please remember that it does take 24 hours for that email to be automatically generated, so look for it sometime tomorrow afternoon. For CPE-related questions, please reach out to cpe@yptc.com. In the related content section, you can access any accompanying materials for this webinar. This includes a PDF copy of the slides and many times will often include related resources. Reactions from our audience throughout the webinar will float along the console screen. Use the Q&A section to ask questions directly to our speakers throughout the presentation. In the speaker bio section, you can find more about our presenters, including their contact information. If you need technical assistance, please use the help button below. Many times, technical issues can be resolved by opening the webinar in Google Chrome or refreshing your browser. Finally, the evaluation button contains our post-webinar evaluation survey. Here is where you can share your commentary and feedback on the presentation. We hope you enjoy our free webinar. Now, let's get into today's topic.
Awesome. Welcome to New Year's Stellar Board. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking an hour out of your day to be with us. A special welcome to anyone who is attending a YPTC webinar for the first time. Before we begin, a quick intro of who we are. YPTC specializes in nonprofit financial management with over 30 years of experience in accounting, reporting, data visualization, budgeting, forecasting, and best practices, along with other things as well. We meet our clients where they need us, especially with our customized solutions. We can manage all of your accounting department or provide support for your established accounting department as needed. We serve clients nationwide, both on-site and remotely, and we actually just opened a few new physical offices, both in Chicago and the Pacific Northwest. I am Deanna Peterson, and I am based in Phoenix, Arizona. I lead our national team of nonprofit subsector specialization experts. I know it's a mouthful, but we currently have 18 different subsector specialization teams that support our client service staff with the complex and unique accounting issues that a lot of our nonprofit clients have. I've been with YPTC for 6 years, and I've held nonprofit board positions in the past. I've also worked with many boards, both during my tenure at YPTC and before joining the firm. Presenting with me today is Ellie Hume, one of our regional directors. Ellie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. As Deanna said, I'm Ellie Hume, and I am based in Long Island, New York. In my role as regional director, I support several of our markets across the country, including New York, New England, Colorado, and as Deanna also said, one of our newest markets, Chicagoland. I've been with YPTC for more than 14 years now and am extremely passionate about board service and education. Actually, I currently serve as treasurer for a board of an organization called Board Strong, which is a nonprofit focused on board governance and education. So today's topic is right up my alley.
Just a few quick reminders from the video playing at the beginning of the session. For this webinar, we'll be using poll questions. These are going to appear in the slide window. Please ensure that you hit submit after selecting your answer to ensure that you receive CPE credit. You can also track your progress within the Earn CPE widget icon on your screen. Finally, we want to hear your questions. Use the Q&A widget to submit any questions you have. We'll do our best to address them throughout the session, but then also we'll stay after the webinar for up to 15 minutes at the top of the hour to address any additional questions. Please note that additional Q&A time at the top of the hour won't be counted towards CPE though, just to make sure everyone's clear. Our goal today is to really share essential financial knowledge and some practical onboarding strategies for nonprofit board members that will empower them to really make informed financial decisions. To do that, we're going to discuss how to assess your board's financial knowledge and then help you design effective onboarding for new board members. We'll also talk about identifying the financial story that needs to be conveyed to the board to provide that useful information for decision making. And then lastly, we'll share some case studies with you to illustrate and help you determine the best method for delivering that financial story. Before we dig too deep into assessing financial knowledge, let's take a quick step back and just look at the bigger picture of board leadership. Nonprofit boards are really essential to the structure and function of how nonprofit organizations run. According to the Nonprofit Finance Fund's 2025 report, about a third of surveyed nonprofits said that their leader has some sort of lived experience representative of the communities that the organization serves. In the same way, many nonprofits work hard to develop diverse boards and boards that have lived experiences. Board diversity goes beyond demographics. It includes a diversity of skills, lived experiences, and perspectives. Diversity of experience benefits the organization with well-rounded leadership, unique perspectives, and really support for the entire organization, which means that not everyone will or should have financial background to join a nonprofit board. But just because someone doesn't have a financial background on your board doesn't mean they don't have fiduciary responsibilities to understand the financial information and to provide oversight. Fiduciary responsibilities are really foundational to board service. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this topic today, as we've covered it in other presentations at YPTC, such as Tides of Transparency. You can find a recording of that webinar on our website's resources. To summarize a baseline of fiduciary responsibilities, this slide shows a basic overview of the three areas. First, duty of care, or actively participating in board meetings and governance. Next, duty of loyalty, prioritizing the organization's interests above the personal and professional gains. And then duty of obedience, ensuring that the organization complies with the laws and really works to further the mission that they've established. The board is not usually involved in the day-to-day activities of the organization and typically really shouldn't get bogged down in the details of management, like what copier vendor that the organization uses. It really is responsible for the strategic decision-making and governance of the organization. The board typically is in charge of approving new policies, approving the budget, adding or removing board members, hiring or firing key officers, engaging the auditors, and authorizing significant financial transactions or new program initiatives. So how can a nonprofit identify what skills and qualities that they should look for in new board members? Well, skill set and experience are really important. Nonprofits should also think beyond resumes. Here's a checklist that you can use during your search. Start with mission alignment. Does this person care deeply about your cause? Representation does matter. Does your board reflect the community you serve? Financial literacy is important, but willingness to learn can just be as valuable. This is really going to be the big focus of today's discussion, by the way. Look for diverse skills, commitment to equity, and the ability to engage consistently. Ethical standards and connector capacity, really that just means the ability to open doors, and those are key as well. BoardSource, which is a great resource for all nonprofits, also emphasize balancing your governance, fundraising, and advocacy roles on your board for a well-rounded board. So thinking about the nonprofits that you're presenting today, how many of your board members have a financial background? Ellie, what about you and your board that you serve? How many have financial background?
Well, I hope everybody's taken a chance to answer our first poll question. And honestly, in the board that I'm currently on, we have quite a few financial background folks, including 2 CPAs.
Oh, wow.
So it's a pretty small board with a lot of financial knowledge, but That's actually kind of unusual in my opinion. I see many of our clients don't have anybody on their board with financial knowledge, and they
Right.
really, look to us for help in understanding their finances. But it really ranges. I think you should try to have at least one person that has a strong financial knowledge, but it can really range.
Yeah, I agree. I see a lot of times on the finance committee, you might have one accountant, one MBA, one, maybe even a lawyer, business lawyer, something like that, just to have a well-rounded committee. But sometimes I've seen boards that have zero financial background. And so maybe it is just the person maybe they own their own business and they're the treasurer, they're in charge of everything, but they don't necessarily know how to read nonprofit financials or understand all of that. So,
yeah. I think, I don't know, maybe a couple more seconds. If you haven't answered the poll, please try to answer the poll. Remember, it's right on the slide.
right.
We want to get a little bit more participation, but I don't want to give it too long. So two more seconds. All right, why don't you close the poll?
We're going to go ahead and close the poll. Well, it looks like 3+ is really the high, and about around 10% don't have any financial background individuals on their board. So I think in general, no matter what kind of financial background, a lot of times that financial background might be in the for-profit space. And so nonprofits are maybe a little bit different. So we're going to kind of jump into ways to help our boards.
All right, awesome. Well, I'll take it from here, Deanna. And, I think our survey really indicated that some have a decent amount of financial knowledge on their board, but many do not. 2 or less was also a fair number in the survey. So that really leads us to our first objective, which is trying to assess and then strengthen the board's financial management knowledge. So let's talk about where we can even start. In our slide here, we're providing an example of a framework that you might consider using. We actually recommend starting by assessing your board's current financial knowledge. And so you might be asking, well, I wonder how I can do that. So you will need to actually get your board members involved, right? We don't want to make any assumptions about people's background. So you could use a tool like a self-assessment to gauge your board's current knowledge and comfort level. We're actually going to show you an example in a little bit. Or you could simply just talk to your board to see where their current comfort level is. Now, you can do this in a larger meeting, but I do warn you that if no one asks questions and everyone says that they're fine, it might be helpful to follow up privately. I don't know about you, Deanna, but I do see some folks in a board meeting hesitate to admit gaps in knowledge in front of the group. So, but that's completely normal. So everyone, as Deanna already mentioned, everyone does bring different experiences to the table. And our goal is to really create that inclusive environment where board members feel safe asking questions and seeking training. Okay, so next we have providing training on targeted education. And so once you know where you're starting from because of the assessment, you can provide an educational session to your board, whether that's someone on your own finance team internally at your organization, perhaps a respected finance director from another nonprofit, or an accounting firm that specializes in working with nonprofits like YPTC. That educational session can be tailored to your board based on their current knowledge and needs that were determined in the assessment step. And in addition to, or even in place of the training session, you might consider integrating learning into your regular board meetings and using interactive activities or providing a cheat sheet that define key terms of your financial statements. And we're going to show you an example of a cheat sheet in a minute. Next, really don't think of that educational session as a one and done thing. You really want to consider how you're going to make sure that any new board members going forward will also receive that training. So think about whether you currently have a board orientation, and if you do, add this to it, or consider setting one up that your training can be added to. Also think about whether there's outside training that you could recommend to new board members. I know there are a lot of webinars and things like this out there that really kind of give boards the basics. And then also think about whether you should conduct board financial training on an annual basis. Things change over time, so it's always good to give people a refresher. So we're going to talk briefly about board orientation shortly as well. And finally, we're in our kind of framework here, we recommend talking about reviewing your controls and policies. The board's financial responsibilities are not only about reading financial statements. Board members also have that fiduciary responsibility to protect the assets of the organization, and which Deanna mentioned briefly. In order to do this, they really should have an understanding of what controls are actually in place. So let's go into each of these a little bit more in detail. First is the assessment. Our goal here would be to determine where board members are coming from in terms of their financial knowledge or any other knowledge. There are a lot of assessments cover a broad range of skills, but we're focused on financial knowledge today. So if you're a checklist person like me and you'd like to use a tool to assess your board's current financial knowledge, here is one example that we very quickly found with a basic internet search. If you'd like to look at the full assessment tool, there's a link on our resource slide, but I highly recommend doing your own research to find a tool that works best for you. There are many others out there to choose from or customize. And using something like this will then give you a starting point for what to focus on as you build your board's financial literacy. For example, it's kind of small here, but if you get a lot of answers in the don't know column, that's a great jumping off point for training opportunities. Now, once you've determined what areas you'd like to focus on based on the results of those assessments, you can then provide training sessions, whether you conduct those yourself or perhaps bring in a third party. You may want to add some of this to your board meeting agenda, as I mentioned, but consider very small chunks needed to be digestible, or set up a separate meeting for training. And we highly recommend that you try to keep it as engaging as possible so everyone gets the most out of it. Also, based on your assessment, you should be able to tailor the training for your board. But on this slide and in this discussion, we're going to give you some common topics that might be helpful based on the trainings that we've been asked to provide for many of our clients. So the first is board financial responsibilities. Really, it's understanding actually what those fiduciary responsibilities are, and then what are their duties specific to finance, like the financial oversight and not being in the weeds of the day-to-day management. Next is accounting and reporting 101. There can be a ton of things in this category of training, honestly. But start with some basics like defining key terms. You know, accountants throw around terms like assets and liabilities and receivables, but to a non-accountant, those might not make sense, right? So it's really important that we provide definitions of important key terms like that. We might also need to explain cash versus accrual accounting. What are the differences, and also how are your financials being presented? You know, generally accepted accounting principles tells us that nonprofits should be using accrual accounting. And what does that actually mean? And we also know that restricted or multi-year pledges happen in the nonprofit space, and those can often be very confusing in the way that they're presented in financials. So we highly recommend that you talk about that in the context of your organization. And then also in Accounting 101, perhaps you might focus on the purpose of each financial statement that's being presented. What does it show? And how is each statement actually related to the other statements in your reports? And then what should board members really be looking for when it comes to financial reporting? Okay. So in our next training topic is about the monthly processes. How about walking your board through the steps that you take every month to actually ensure financial statement accuracy, like the reconciliations? We accountants often call that the month-end close process. And you can proactively share this information with your board to give them comfort, because that might not be a question they know how to ask about whether how do you know the financials are right, okay? And then lastly, talk about some red flags your board should look out for. I think this is an area that makes board members pretty nervous, and they probably are wondering, will I even know what I'm looking for? How will I know if I miss a red flag? So it's really important that we help them with some examples of what to look for. Now,
yeah, Ellie, this reminds me of when we're auditing, right? So,
yeah.
And on an auditor cap, we always had to sit down and discuss what could happen. How could we defraud this organization? And then kind of walk through those internal controls that we'd like to see. So it reminds me a lot about that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but I think these are outside of the scope of today's training, these topics in particular. But if you'd like to learn more about any of these, we do have a lot of past webinars on these specific topics. In particular, the ones that I think are great to start with might be Financial Reports Challenge that was in January 2025, Spotting Financial Risks in Nonprofits from February 2025, and even the one that you already mentioned, Tides of Transparency from August of 2024. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, so that was board training. And now what about that cheat sheet that I mentioned earlier? So training sessions are perhaps the most obvious way to educate your board on financials, but another way is really to provide them with annotated financial statements that is basically creating a cheat sheet to help explain key terms. Now, you can then use these cheat sheets to really supplement the training sessions on the topics we just discussed. So this is an example of a cheat sheet that we created. And here we're highlighting common areas where we often experience confusion or lots of questions from the board. And you can tailor yours, to your specific organization. But in this instance, we've used the orange text and the orange highlight to call out the information related to current operations and net income by helping to define change in net assets and operating income. And then the dark blue circle is really helping explain donations with restrictions. And then a little bit lighter in blue text and highlight, you see that we're explaining releases from restrictions. And then the gray highlight and text is helping to explain what's going on with the capital campaign. As you can imagine, a tool like this can help your board feel more comfortable with the statements. It can really proactively answer some basic questions that really might go unasked, like, what do you mean by change in net assets? What is that? Or once some of these basic questions are out of the way, your board can ask better questions, like, in this instance about capital campaign, what do we need to do to keep contributions coming in now that our capital campaign is complete? So you can see where that's a much more meaningful question to the organization than just getting stuck in the basic terminology. And then once you have this cheat sheet developed, you might consider adding it to your board orientation materials. So board members can refer back to it during meetings until they really get familiar with the way your financials are presented. Speaking of board orientation, This is a checklist or an example of things that I consider including in your board orientation, which we actually found from the National Council of Nonprofits, and we consolidated a few things to make it a little bit easier to read. But the full checklist is linked in our resource slide. Now, there's a lot on this page, and I'm not going to focus on everything, but I do want to call out two things in particular. The first one is setting board member expectations. And I think I saw some chats in here about this in particular. Really, the board orientation materials is a great place to document what's expected of each member, like your give-get fundraising requirement if you have one, or expectations about promoting the organization on social media or attending board meetings, or even attending other events that the organization holds, like fundraisers, performances, etc. The other thing that I think is very interesting about this section is consider having board member job descriptions. We have those on the board that I sit on, and it really is a great way to help set clear expectations and to help board members understand that their role really is a job to be taken seriously, okay? And then, of course, I'm going to highlight the recent financial reports item here because that's what we're talking about today. This is where you could add those cheat sheets and other financial management training materials that we've been discussing to help members better understand the reports, okay? Now, many organizations used to have physical binders for board orientation, but I think in today's more remote and tech-savvy environment, you might consider making it a PowerPoint deck or use an online board management platform to help organize and share information. So when considering an online board management platform to help you organize and communicate with your board, you want to find software that can provide a workspace for board members, executives, and other professionals in charge to stay organized, make timely decisions, and plan progress in a cohesive manner. Technology can really make or break board engagement. Essentials include scheduling tools with RSVP tracking, secure document access for board packets and policies, as well as digital voting and minutes. I love having this. Now, I do want to make sure that you know, like, be transparent with your board about the cost. Leaders want to know that there's an investment, right? You have to make an investment up front to set these up. These platforms range in price, but typically have an initial implementation cost and then an ongoing fee. Now, I think this is a really interesting place where you could actually solicit funding to help cover the initial cost of this type of governance tool. And we've actually seen some of our nonprofit clients do that successfully. Other features, making sure it's mobile friendly to ensure accessibility for those busy board members that are all over the place, traveling. And then, compliance features like audit trails that protect your organization, collaboration tools, keep committees on track. And then, there's a ton of options out there for these platforms. We've listed just a few here: Board Effect, Boardable, and Onboard. But really, do your research to find the one that really best meets your organization's needs. So I think that's going to take us one more topic before we get to our next poll question. So last part of educating your board is to as part of their fiduciary responsibilities, remember the board is responsible for safeguarding the assets of the organization and providing proper financial oversight. So help them understand how the organizations are being protected. Tell them about your internal controls. Hopefully those are already documented in a policies and procedures manual, and hopefully the manual is up to date and at least reviewed and updated annually. Now, I'm going to make a suggestion here that people might think is not popular, but I do recommend that your board review your policies and procedures annually. I know you're thinking I'm crazy. Nobody wants to read the policies and procedures manual every year, and I totally hear that. but don't think of this as reading a manual and then providing a rubber stamp of approval in a vote. This could really be a great opportunity for the finance team to attend a board meeting to discuss what has changed since the prior year. You could even use AI to help you identify and summarize the changes from one year to another. And then going one step forward, you can use this as an opportunity to provide space on an annual basis to make board members comfortable asking questions about internal controls, right? Let them consider and even talk about what could go wrong for our organization, and then help them understand what controls you have in place to prevent or detect those things, right? So I think that's a really interesting open conversation that you can have, and let people test you out. What all the schemes are changing constantly. So ask questions and share where you're protecting your assets. Okay. So, Deanna, I'm curious. I think we're launching our next poll here. How are you educating board members on fiscal responsibilities and understanding key information? So I'm curious if any of our audience members today are doing any of the things we just discussed, board orientation, specific financial training, cheat sheets, policies and procedures. Maybe you're doing some of these or none of these. I'd just love to get a sense. Deanna, what are you seeing in the organizations you work with while everybody answers this?
Yeah, we see a lot of clients come to us and they don't do any kind of an orientation for their board. And so by introducing some of that, it really helps them understand what what their expectations are and how to really understand those financials. The board that I've been on in the past, one of them, we did an orientation, but it was directly with the ED, just kind of one-on-one, understanding the mission and all of that. When we got into the finances, even as a CPA, the documents that were provided were just a lot of information and teeny tiny numbers. And it actually took me quite a few months before I really got my feet underneath me about the financial information. So some of that, can be done
I think
a little
that's
bit
actually,
easier.
I do think more organizations are doing board member orientation, but I almost think it's more about introducing them to the mission and not so much about what's going on behind the scenes, how the organization actually works and the financial picture. So I'm hoping this gives people better ideas of things they can do to provide training on financial matters in particular.
Yeah, I see that Misha has a question that maybe we can address at the top of the hour in a little more detail. But basically, she's saying that they're struggling with providing a simplified budget to the board, and they've got like a QBO export. And so that definitely is what we're talking about here, is being able to kind of summarize that, provide the information that the board needs without getting into the weeds. So Misha, definitely we'd love to chat with you afterwards. And hopefully some of the rest of the session is going to help you out as well.
Yeah. All right, I think let's go ahead and close the poll and see our results. All right, so just as we said, there's a new board member orientation, 23%, glad to hear. But the numbers of people doing actual financial training might be a little bit lower. So some people are doing multiple. All right, well, this is great. For those of you that are in the none of the above category, I really hope that you're going to take something away from today to really amp up the training that you can do for your board. All right.
Yeah, maybe just one thing, right? Maybe you don't have to jump all the way in the deep end, but just kind of pick the best thing that you think is going to work best for your board.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked a lot about educating your board, and next we're going to dive into how to tell the story. Through education and experience, board members will become more and more comfortable with interpreting your financial statements. However, it really is the role of the finance professionals to meet the board where they are. We want to ensure that we're communicating the most important financial information that's useful for the board to understand the financial picture and also to make effective decisions. Sometimes we accountants close the books, we create the reports, and then we're like, okay, our job is done. And most of that time, it's because we don't have a lot of time at the end of the month. We're rushing to get all the numbers in the system and reconcile, and then the reports are completed. So the analysis, the interpretation, and the storytelling portion can get forgotten. But in order to really empower the organization's management, leadership, and the board to effectively run the organization, it really is imperative that the finance team analyzes the numbers, pulls out the key information, and then really delivers that financial story to the board along with the reports. And especially in the day and age, we've got AI and automation. Finance teams, our role should be to focus on streamlining that bookkeeping and reporting so we can really spend a little bit more time analyzing and interpreting the story behind the numbers. So really, accountants specialize in reading numbers, right? Like doctors read and interpret medical test results, or a mechanic can understand what's under the hood of the car. I know I don't know what's wrong with my car when the engine light turns on, and that happened to me last week, actually. I needed a mechanic to run the diagnostic, interpret the code, and then tells me what needs to be done. Luckily, it was under warranty. Likewise, when your doctor reads your test results, they don't just read the lab report word for word. They give you that interpretation. They tell you what you need to know, what's important, and what's actionable. This is exactly what the board and the organization's management that we work with need from the finance department. To a non-accountant, the story and the financials might be really difficult or impossible to interpret, and that's our job. So we want to tell the story in a way that the user, whatever their background, will really understand it. Think about a newspaper reporter and how they tell a story. They use headlines, pictures, and graphs. They pull the reader in, they grab their attention, and they really get their message across. So how does the finance team do that? We start with determining what we can measure. That might be data in the accounting system, or maybe another system like the development database, for example. It might mean looking back a few more years than we normally do so that we can look at long-term data trends. We should also be asking, how do we best evaluate performance? What's our target? Are we comparing against budget or last year? Are we comparing our cash balance to a target number? Or do we have some other programmatic targets? This is a great conversation to have with the board during that planning season, or maybe even during the 5-year strategic planning session. What are the goals of the organization? What are the financial measures that can be tracked along the way to evaluate how the organization is progressing towards its goals? This is a great place to start. Then, what is important to the audience, in our case, the board, and how are we, the finance director or the finance team, going to make sure that the board sees that? Lastly, how do we draw attention to the right questions to start a conversation? I'll say this a few times during the session today, but the goal of a board meeting should be to ensure that the board members know the issues at hand really quickly so they can have productive conversations and discussions about the action items and next steps. Not just a Q&A session, not just an information session. It really should be the time that they're getting a value add and they're providing that information to the organization. So based on all of this, you might be thinking, well, that would mean that I have to prepare a different package for the board each meeting if I have a different story that I'm trying to tell. Yep, that's exactly what we're saying. You might not be preparing the exact same package at every board meeting. Parts of it might vary, depending on what you need to tell. So far too often, the finance team just gets stuck in a rut. We reuse the exact same package to present the financial information. But we all know that the finance information doesn't stay the same. So a static package doesn't really draw the attention to anything specific. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to not have any consistency. Consistency is good. It just shouldn't be the only thing that the board sees every month. So I'm going to take a quick detour to talk about really catering your reporting to the audience. As I was just talking about, financial packages are not one size fits all for every organization, not for every time period. They're also likely not one size fits all for everyone within your organization. Today, we're focused on presenting to the board, but your finance team might need to present to each of these stakeholders, and they might need to choose a different presentation style when presenting to each of those audiences. More detail will be required when you're presenting the financial information to the ED or department heads, or even the finance committee. But today we're going to talk about specifically what do we need to present to our board. Think summarized, think big picture focused, and include a lot of context and narrative explanations for the board. Again, our goal is that the board is spending less time trying to figure out what the message is and more time discussing the key issues found in the financials. We want an engaging board who knows that valuable discussions happen at the board meetings. So they shouldn't miss a meeting. It goes back to that fiduciary responsibilities.
Yeah.
So let's serve up their data in a way that makes the message really apparent so they can dive right into those discussions. Here are some ideas, and we'll look at some examples soon as well. First, condensed financial statements. Summarize the categories that you present to the board to what's important. Keep it simple. Less is typically more. Consider using things like highlights or boldface or underline to direct the reader, but don't go overboard with color. Use a memo, usually one page if you can do it. Anticipate the questions and address them proactively. For instance, if one department has revenue that's significantly below budget, let the board know why that happened. Start with your headline or elevator pitch, make it clear, don't use a ton of jargon, and really just write in a way that a non-accountant will understand. Next, we've got static visualization. Basically, a graph or a chart. Again, keep it simple, so that the message speaks for itself, but also add a little narrative or maybe a headline to focus the reader's attention. And then you can use dynamic visualization as well. It's useful if your audience would really appreciate interactivity. This could be done in ways to maybe combine data from, let's say, your accounting system to your donor database in one interactive dashboard using Power BI or Tableau or something like that. Whatever method you choose for your audience, the financial information should still be clearly conveyed. One way to do this is through KPIs, or key performance indicators. Boards need clear metrics to make informed decisions, so let's cover a few of these right now. Liquidity ratio and operating reserves really show that financial stability. Program efficiency tells you how much is going toward mission delivery. Your revenue diversity reduces risk, while your fundraising ROI measures that cost effectiveness. Don't overlook board engagement. Attendance and participation matter, and it might be helpful for the board to see that on a regular basis. And then finally, maybe some scenario planning metrics to help your board prepare for unexpected changes. These might be, maybe you've set up different scenarios and you've got a trigger point that if a ratio gets below X, then that's when you're going to implement some cost saving measures. For more on strategic planning and scenario planning, please check out our webinar, Scenario Planning for Nonprofits.
And I think,
yep.
Yeah, Deanna, I just want to also mention, like, this is not an all-inclusive list. These are just some high-level ideas. I see some people like, what about this? What about that? In the chat. So there can be a lot of things to measure, but be careful to focus in on what's the most important thing to measure for your organization. What matters?
Exactly.
How do you measure the impact the organization is having?
Exactly. Really go back to that strategic planning session and set up what are your KPIs, what are specifically this organization needing to look at on a regular basis, and go with those. So in addition to your financial KPIs, programmatic KPIs can help board members understand the organization's impact. Impact is huge, and it's super important for all of your board members to understand how your mission is being moved forward. So as YPTC's Nonprofit Specializations Director, I get to work with all of our subsector experts across the firm who really specialize in different types of nonprofits. Here are just a few examples, again, not exhaustive by any means, of some programmatic KPIs, depending on different types of nonprofits. These can then be coupled with financial KPIs to measure the organization's effectiveness and efficiency. For example, an expanding arts and culture organization might show an increased performance cost at the same time as increased admissions, revenue, and attendance. But if the organization's month's cash on hand is declining during that same period, it could indicate that the increased audience isn't really covering the full changes in cost. So an adjustment might be necessary in this situation, or it might be an intentional investment for the organization's future success. But that's a conversation the board could have. Likewise, if an organization has a large number of months cash on hand, but really has seen a drop in services provided, that'd be likely that something that the board needs to discuss. What's an appropriate number of months cash on hand? And what should the organization do with any excess cash? Should you invest the money, or should you maybe expand services in a certain area? Again, a good conversation for the board to have. That leads us to our next poll question. Does your board regularly review mission-specific KPIs in addition to financial?
Yeah. What are you seeing?
I see a lot of times those financial KPIs get the forefront, and then sometimes the mission KPIs get forgotten. So
and I think sometimes it's the opposite, right? Like they focus on like, here's what we're doing, but then forget to explain the finance stuff in the KPIs as well. So I think it really can go both ways. It really depends, in my opinion, who's leading the charge of those KPIs. Sometimes the development team runs the KPIs because they want to show like how they're doing fundraising wise and how that's, equating to how many people they're able to serve and things like that. And then the finance stuff gets kind of pushed back. Or is finance leading the discussion and putting forward the KPIs? Well, they're going to think about the ones that are relevant to them before they think about all the other impact-driven KPIs, in my opinion.
Yeah, so it goes back to just needing that collaboration and the coordination between the two. I see a couple of comments in the chat saying that their board really doesn't want to see any financial KPIs, and maybe their CEO doesn't want to see those KPIs given to the board. But I really would recommend to couple the two together because it really shows the larger picture. And especially if you're not looking at days cash on hand, that can get out of whack and it can put the organization in a really hard spot if you're not kind of watching some of those.
Yeah, for sure. I'm loving some of the chat going on. I appreciate the feedback. I hear people are kind of having both sides. One, it's either finance driven or it's, maybe fundraising or programmatic driven. So I'm glad that, this conversation I think is really helpful in the sense that we're kind of understanding that it can come from both directions, but it's a collaboration, and the finance can't do it by themselves, and the fundraising or programs, they can't do it by themselves. We all have to work together to figure out like what is the most meaningful thing to measure for our organizations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
I think we're going to move on. Yeah.
Yep. We'll close that poll. It looks like every meeting and occasionally, rarely, we do have a couple, about 20% not yet, but interested. So that's something to look into as well and kind of dive into have a conversation with the board and the ED or management. What do they want to see? What would be effective to make decisions easier and get you out of that Q&A in the meetings and into the lively discussions. So yeah, awesome. Okay, so now we threw a lot of theory at you, but you might be thinking, okay, what does this actually look like? So we're going to go through some case studies. Next, Ellie and I are going to do some role playing. So you're going to have to bear with us a little bit. We're going to walk through some before and after examples in this role play session. Ellie is going to play the role of a non-accountant board member that has some concerns with their current financial reports. And I'm going to try and show Ellie some new presentation ideas to maybe help kind of remedy those concerns. So,
all right, so we're shifting mindset. I'm not an accountant. All right, so hi, Deanna. I am so happy to meet you today. I'm really hoping that you can help me understand my organization's finances. I really don't have a financial background. I'm an artist, and left brain, right brain situation going on over here. But being an artist is really why I love the organization that I'm supporting as a board member. We bring art to young people in after-school programs. But putting that aside, I'm just hoping that you can help me wrap my head around the numbers today.
Oh, that's great. I'm super excited to meet with you as well, Ellie. And I completely understand. It sounds like the organization is really an exciting opportunity for these young people to get into to art. So I hope that I can help you see maybe some alternative presentations that will help you understand the financial portion of your board service, so you can at least be comfortable asking questions in those meetings.
Awesome. All right, so here's my first issue. At every board meeting, I am given so many spreadsheets, and they're all these itty bitty, teeny tiny numbers. And quite honestly, I just put my head down and just nod along in the conversation, because I really have no idea what I should be focused on. And in the end, I just trust that my finance team knows what they're doing, and I don't ask any questions. And I feel really uncomfortable with that. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Look at this. See what I mean? A bunch of tiny numbers. Good thing I recently got glasses. I can hardly see the numbers, much less understand what I'm supposed to focus on here.
Yeah, I really can see why you're having trouble focusing. This is basically just right out of the accounting system. This specific report is from QuickBooks, where every single GL account is included and every number is being shown to the penny. It really is hard to see the forest through the trees in this report. And I can also see that the finance team really wanted to fit this onto one page, because all of those numbers are showing up so small and you can't really read them. Again, when we present to the board, we want to keep it simple. We want to direct the reader and add explanation. This really does none of that. Let me show you a condensed version of this information. So this is exactly the same information. Obviously, the presentation's not groundbreaking. It really only took me a few minutes to take the other data and simplify it. One obvious difference is that I grouped all of those expenses into summary categories, and I removed the account numbers and the pennies. They're just noise for you and the other board members. Also, note that we changed the heading to the variance column to favorable and unfavorable. I don't know if this is the case for you, but I've learned that a lot of board members, and even really a lot of financial people, have trouble honing in on what variances are good and bad. So really relabeling so that the positive is favorable and the negative is unfavorable can help you kind of save some time trying to figure that out. We've also added some conditional formatting in Excel to show an icon next to the variances over 5,000, either positive or negative. Now it should be easier for you to see that the special events income is below year-to-date budget in that red diamond shape, and the program service fees are above budget in the green circle. The only expense with a significant variance is the savings in travel and meetings. This presentation does help keep it simple and direct the reader. It still doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't add that explanation part, but this format hopefully is an improvement over the previous one, and it'll help you kind of know what questions to ask. Why is a certain item up or down? Just a quick note to be careful when you're using red and green. Do you know if any of your board members are colorblind?
I don't actually.
Okay, well, if they are, red and green could look the same to them. So in this case, we've used the shape as a slightly different shape for the favorable and unfavorable variances as well. We could also include a key like this one to define what those icons are.
Well, you know, this is really interesting, and it is certainly much better than that other spreadsheet that we were just looking at. But as you said, now it has me wondering why the special event income isn't higher. You know, I know we worked really hard on that event. We had a decent turnout. I mean, I don't really understand. And I guess this is the difference, right? The old presentation left me confused, so I didn't ask any questions because I didn't know where to start. At least now I can see where the issues might be, and then I can follow up perhaps with our event chair with some additional questions. So I appreciate that very much. And, you know, here's my next problem. You know, as I said, I'm not a numbers person. I actually tend to zone out when someone starts to ask me to focus on a lot of detail. And I really wish someone could just tell me what I need to know. And can you not use any of that crazy accounting jargon, please?
Of course. Let's look at that same report that we were just discussing, actually. Well, again, this report answers the what is happening question. It really does not address the why is it happening question. Finance teams can really get ahead of the board and management questions by providing a memo and interpretation along with the financial package. So I've created one for us to look at together. By adding a memo, using an executive summary, some financial highlights, we can really interpret the major events and the reasons for the variances ahead of the meeting. Again, this is a way to get the meeting to move from a Q&A session to really a valuable discussion on action items. So here we can see that the bottom line is even better than budgeted. And then in the financial highlights, the spring benefit brought in $25,000 less than expected, mainly because attendance was less than we anticipated due to a storm. So hopefully that kind of brings light to the issue. Additionally, this is a great place to add other things that maybe don't even show up in the financials. Here we talk about an update for a new funding opportunity. The revenue is not going to show in the financials yet, but the board might be interested in hearing the status. You mentioned that you're not a numbers person, and I'm sure that's actually true for a lot of your colleagues on the board. And I hope this memo really helped.
Yeah, it did. But I also realized that we are running close on time. And I know we have to get one more poll question in. So we're going to jump to the poll question, even though it's kind of relevant to the context that we're talking in. And then we'll come back to the rest of the examples if people can stay a little bit longer. Okay. So let's try to jump to the poll real quick.
Let me see if I can do that.
There we go. I got it. All right. So I know we jumped ahead a little bit, but a lot of the things that we're sharing today are talking about removing the noise, like the pennies and all the things in summary form, adding that memo that Deanna was just talking about with executive highlights, and using graphics and data visualization, which we didn't quite get to yet. But what methodology would really help your organization most in conveying the financial message to your board? Would any of these help you, or all of them perhaps? So we'll just give everybody a few, 30 seconds or so. And, Deanna, we can go back to our role playing in a second. But for me, one of the things that I feel sometimes this can be a little bit overwhelming, and especially as a financial person that's so used to doing things in, all the detail and everything, to really think about baby steps, right? You can think about each stage here as a baby step, like first summarizing things so there's not so much noise on the page, and then, okay, got the summary. Now how do I add the memo to provide that highlight that people should focus on? And then once we have that, then we can work towards the graphics that tell the story in a visual way. And it's like, it adds up over time, that it's not like a jump in and do it all at one time, because that can be overwhelming. What do you think?
100% agree. Exactly. And then also, if you need some help with that presentation style and you really want a little bit of a oomph to your presentation, know when to call in the experts, because sometimes just getting that little assistance or advice on what could be helpful for the organization could get you on the right feet, or at least, going in the right direction. So we're going to go ahead and close this poll question here. And it looks like all of the above kind of wins the show. I don't think we have a ton of time to go back to some of those other examples, but they're in the slides as people can download them, and you'll be able to see that before and after in the slides of, maybe there's cash is increased, but then a graph shows that the cash increase is really, now they have 21 months cash on hand. So that's the issue they want to talk about versus, our cash increased. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Obviously, we've got a lot of information to share with you, and we went through quite a bit of it. Here are some of the takeaways. And then, of course, our resource tab and our contact information. If you have any specific questions about your specific organization, feel free to reach out to us at any time. Ellie and I will stay on for a bit longer.
Don't forget to complete the evaluation survey. I'm sure we're going to get some comments on running out of time, but that's all right. We do really appreciate your feedback and your insights. It does help us plan. If you have other ideas for training you want to see from YPTC, please give us your feedback in the evaluation survey. We are going to stay on. We're going to try to respond to questions that came through the chat. There were many. Hopefully, we already addressed some of them throughout the presentation, and then we can potentially go back to some of the examples as time allows. But thank you to everybody for spending the last hour with us today. I hope you enjoyed our presentation, and please don't forget to download the resources. They're really great to refer back to.
Awesome.
All right,
let's jump into some of these questions real quick.
Yeah.
I was seeing some questions about, for instance, and I forget who it was because now the chat's just kind of blowing up, but there was a question about how do you maybe talk about a variance that is not as easy to explain, right? As, yeah, there was a storm on the day of the event, but if something really wasn't going well, how do you really kind of explain the variance? I always like to, you kind of have to call it what it is, bring up that lesson learned piece, right? So when things don't go well, it's really a lesson learned. What are you going to do differently next time? What are the opportunities for growth? I recommend kind of leaning into that.
Yeah, and I think that goes along really nicely with one of the things that we always say at YPTC. It's like we can identify problems, but if you don't bring a solution or a couple of recommendations to how to solve the problem, it's not really helpful to the discussion, right? So that's really where the finance team and the leadership of the organization can bring up issues in a more effective way with the board and say, okay, this is what's going on, but here's what we've already been doing about it, or where we'd like to do something about it, and these are our suggestions. And then maybe that's what the board really needs to be discussing, is weighing the options to deal with the issue, as opposed to just talking about the problem without really being results or solution oriented, right? That's kind of talking about, I think, that directing the reader, directing the conversation. What do we want the board to accomplish in the board meeting? Where do we need their help? And it's not just presenting a problem, it's getting them to help find the solution. And by bringing areas of ideas, we're already helping to solve the problem. So.
Right. Okay, so there's another question here from Chad. And then we'll maybe jump into a couple of these other scenarios if people still want to hang out until the 45 of the hour. But Chad is asking about really how nonprofit accounting may or may not really represent the true economic activity, so cash. So he's thinking about how do you kind of talk about when, okay, you're recognizing the revenue, not necessarily when the cash is being received. How do you clearly convey this to the board? And I think it goes back to that education, right? Understanding how the financial statements work together, and then, yes, bring it back to, okay, and this is what it means on a cash level. This is what it means on a cash forecast level. So we have a lot of resources on that in our website too.
Yeah, I think the forecasting is really taking a cash flow forecast perspective of like, here's your current picture, but here's where the cash came in and out and affected the balance, or will affect it in the future, right? Just because we recorded a pledge today doesn't mean the cash is in the bank, right? But we want to know when it will be, and that's how the cash forecast can help show that. But again, if you're not explaining these tools and your board doesn't know how to use them, they're not going to be that helpful, right? So it's perhaps considering the other visualization things that we're presenting here. So maybe we can jump to, I'll jump to this
examples. Yeah, this is a great example.
Talk about cash in general on this one. It was another spreadsheet, but what do we even know if the amount of cash we have is good? And but if we present it in a completely different way, using a graph, it really draws the attention of the reader about, oh my goodness, we have 21 months of worth of cash to cover expenses, but do we really need that much, right?
So again, then your meeting can go into, oh, Should we be investing this? Do we have an investment policy? What could that look like for the board and for the organization, as opposed to, oh, okay, I see this, going back to the statement of financial position, I see this statement of financial position, our cash is going up. That seems good. And then you're kind of just moving on, as opposed to really addressing the issue at hand, that you might have so much cash that you really should be having that cash work for you in some kind of safe investment option. Then that last one we were going to talk about real quick is really when you're looking at a statement of activities, sometimes the variances can pull your eye to the wrong thing. So in this situation, you might be looking at this report and a board member might go, oh my goodness, we really need to talk about insurance, because this insurance
went up 150%, right?
Doubled. Yeah, it's so much more than it was last year, when in reality, yes, the change in net assets went down significantly, and that's something we need to talk about. But the reason for it is really in that personnel costs. So if we show it in a different way to really tell the story, we can condense the information to a point where you can see, yes, revenue might be a little bit down, expenses are clearly up, and it really is due to growing staff costs. So then the board understands, right, we did hire some more people. Oh, wait a second. One of those people was a development director. Why isn't our revenue going up at the same time? Or are we expecting this lag? So again, it gets right into that conversation with the board, as opposed to just oh, okay, I see that this is happening, and then you kind of move on.
Mm. And just for those that are here, a lot of our graphics have been prepared in Data Wrapper, in case you want to know what we're using here. We've mentioned Data Wrapper, maybe Power BI people use, Tableau people use, but I think it is key to remember, there are tools out there to help you be more efficient, present things in more meaningful ways. But you don't have to be an expert in all of them. And that's, reach out to the people that are for support. So, that could be YPTC or, any other, there are a lot of accounting firms out there that support organizations, but of course we want to talk about YPTC. That's why we're here today. So.
Also, so Will has a question about how to maybe indicate volunteer hours. Maybe it's just a KPI that literally says volunteer hours, and maybe volunteer hours last year or something like that. Something simple would be helpful. And I know that volunteers typically are not going to put them in as in-kind, revenue, unless it's a professional, service, like a legal service or something like that, that you're getting that volunteer in-kind donation. However, you can still include that when you're talking to your board as one of those programmatic KPIs. How many volunteer hours are going into really furthering your mission?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see another question here. I'm not sure if Tamika is still with us, but she said she does use many presentation versions, one for internal management, one for the finance committee, one for the board presentation, and wants to know if we have a best practice on how to manage this to keep reporting simple and focused. And I think, to me, it's just each one is a summary level of the one before it, so that the data is all based on the same beginning, raw data, and that it's just summarizing each level. So I think, to me, that would be a best practice.
Right. And then again, just you're maybe then adding a few charts or graphs to tell the story for that specific, month or that specific time period. So you've got your standard reports detailed for the department heads, a little bit less for the finance committee, summarized for the board. And then you really kind of analyze it and go, okay, the board really needs to see that our cash is decreasing, or the board really needs to see how well our programs are doing, or maybe this one program's not doing well. We need to discuss what to do with that. What is the story behind those things?
Yeah. There's so
Okay.
many great questions here. It's almost distracting to figure out which ones we need to answer. There's so many wonderful ones. Some great comments from others just telling us that they agree with the things we've said, or asking for more clarity. So are there any here that's jumping out at you?
I am seeing again another question from Monica about kind of just that budget and program spending. If there is some programs that are underspending their budget, that might not necessarily be a good thing, even though it's an underspend. But specifically, if you've got some reimbursable grants, that you might be leaving money on the table if you're underspending. So I think you could definitely just shout that out and maybe even change the icon, or really make sure that that's part of the memo, that while this is a positive variance to the budget, really it's impeding our ability to further our mission by not really spending this money so that we can get that reimbursement grant or whatever it might be. Because I agree with you, Monica, it's not necessarily a good thing if you're underspent on your expenses to your budget.
Yeah. I want to go back to a slide here. And I'm thinking, is it Mitchell here asked what methodology would help in communicating to the board? And I think the intent of this conversation today is really to say any and all of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's start somewhere, right? Build up from what you already have. You know, if you're way in the weeds on the finances, start with a summary, condense the financials, keep it simple. Then work towards a financial statement memo, then work towards visualization in some more meaningful way. But starting somewhere is better than just keep giving the same thing that you've always been giving. So hopefully that helps you. Our whole intent here is that this is a way, all of the suggestions we have today are to help you communicate better with your board.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one last question I think we've got some time for. It's how do you address, this is from Erica, by the way, how do you address board overstepping into the weeds of the organization? And I think that goes back to a couple of different things. Well, first of all, it's that education at the beginning, that orientation of this is what the board is focused on. This is what the board's role is, and this is what management's role is. And then also, as the organization, you decide what level of detail you're going to be providing to the board. And if you need to adjust that, it might be really talking to a couple of key board members, getting them on board with understanding the reason why you want to kind of get the board out of the weeds, because you need their expertise and their opinion on bigger picture items. And some of these little copier items or little items that don't necessarily move the mission forward are wasting time, their time. We want their time to be used valuably.
And honestly, I think if you give them the weeds, they're going to be in the weeds. But if you don't give them the weeds to be in, they're not going to be there, right? So if, again, it's about focusing the board on where you need them to be doing their job as oversight, and that's directing, bringing up the issues that you really need their support and discussion on in order to move forward. And so that's where directing the reader is super important. That concept that we talked about, directing the reader to what we think is important, what management thinks is important. That's where you get the board engaged. It's not, yes, you're going to look at details a little bit more with the finance committee, and they might have suggestions on what they want to bring to the board as well for what's meaningful and what needs to be discussed. But the whole board, they don't need to be in the weeds.
Right. Oh, I 100% agree. And that's where I have seen a lot of boards needing to maybe make a transition. I think it's a little bit harder to make that transition if they're used to seeing all that detail, and we want to kind of scale it back a little bit to hone in the message a little bit better. But that's where if you can have a couple of board members get on board, have some conversations to explain the why, and then maybe even have your board members take some external training to see, maybe have them watch this recording or watch something from the National Council of Nonprofits where they're really discussing, okay, what's the board role and what's the management role? So it's not just you telling them you're not supposed to be really in the weeds as much. We want to kind of have you think big picture. It's not just coming from you. It can come from an outside source too. So
yeah. I want to do one more that caught my eye from Blair. It says many of our board members have a tendency to say, well, if Rick, our treasurer, looked at the financials, I'm good. How do we combat that? And honestly, that's what this presentation is also about. It's really making sure that they're educated on their whole responsibility. Just because someone else is the treasurer or you have a CPA on your board and they're looking at it, that does not absolve the rest of the members from their responsibilities to understand what's going on in the finances. And so, again, going back to education, making sure they fully understand what is expected of them, what their job really is. And again, because it is a job, and that they do have important responsibilities regardless of their skill set. And that's why we have to know what their skill set is so we can bring everybody up to the right level.
Awesome. So we also realize, though, it is like an unpaid job.
Yes.
99.5% of all nonprofit board members. This is a volunteer position, but it is a job, and we need their support in order to really further the mission. So again, are they really in tune with the mission? Do they care enough about your mission in order to help the organization in these big strategic, big picture items? So yeah. Thank you all so much. Ellie and I are super excited and happy to have you. There's a lot of questions we'll look at, and we'll be, we can reach out offline as well.
And if anybody needs help with making these financial summaries and graphics and all the things, please don't hesitate to let us know. We hope you enjoyed our presentation, and thank you everybody for being here today.